Hello fellow nerdlings, it's Josh the Astronerd. Today marks the first day of Pride Month, so I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to share an idea that I have been sitting on for quite some time, Real Talk Tuesday. My intention with Real Talk Tuesday is to carve out a space where I can share my perspectives, my lived experience, and opinions on topics going on in the world around us in a more unscripted approach. I do want to create more educational style videos with very researched, thorough topics, but this is really meant to be a space where I'm able to just share my opinion with all of you on some sort of current event. But this is my space to really share with you how I feel or what I think about something that's going on in the world around us. So as I said, today marks the first day of Pride, and the topic that I really want to cover is just to share with you a bit of my own personal experience with Pride, why it matters, and how I've come to more deeply appreciate it as I've aged and done more research. 2 administrative things to get out of the way first. Number 1, this is not a space to spew false information, phobias of any kind, or debate whether or not I or any members of my community have the right to exist. If you feel the urge to violate this boundary, I invite you to take note of your exits. Please know they may be behind you, and I kindly invite you to fuck right off through them. If you choose to violate this boundary anyway, please know your gal loves receipts, so I will screenshot your comment, report it as hate speech, and then block you. And then 2, and importantly, just a little bit of a content warning, I will not be explicitly detailing any act of violence, but I will be mentioning in context the fact that members of our community are subjected to violence. Again, it won't be explicit in any way, shape, or form, but if this isn't a state of mind that you're in right now, I would much rather that you care for your own mental health. So if this is where we part, I wish you a very happy Pride Month, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. If you choose to stick around, then let's get into it. So before I get into it, I will say I was debating even recording a video about this, but then I woke up today on this first day of Pride to homophobia openly being shared on Facebook. Where, you might ask? On a post by a candle company promoting a label making competition in honor of Pride Month. I accidentally clicked on comments and was greeted by the classics. I wish that companies would stop shoving it in our faces. I choose to honor the promise of God. And my personal favorite, what about straight Pride Month? My first reaction, who hurt you? My second reaction, where the hell did I put my tiny violin? Is it in here? Is it in here? My third and most accurate reaction,
What the fuck is going on in here on this day?
it just reminded me why Pride is so important. While we've come a long way as a society, it still never ceases to amaze me that there are people out there who are very comfortable vocalizing homophobia, transphobia, and guising it as some sort of moral argument. So anyway, that aside, I realize that I haven't done necessarily an amazing job introducing myself here. If you've followed me long enough, you've probably strung some of this information together and figured it out. But I think that sharing some context to my experience is helpful as to why I was really hesitant to interact with Pride as a young adult, and why I've come to appreciate it so much more deeply over the past few years especially. So first and foremost, I am a member of the LGBTQIA+ community. I am gay and also gender nonconforming. My pronouns are he/they, meaning that you are not going to misgender me if you refer to me as he, him, his. It's probably a little bit more accurate for they, them, theirs, because I don't really exist within the confines of masculinity, so that's sort of the next best thing that I can select for pronouns would be they, them, theirs. But for some additional context as to my hesitancy to embrace Pride despite my identity as a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, I'm gonna start at the beginning. So first of all, I am adopted. It was coordinated during my biological mother's pregnancy. My biological mom's OBGYN was my parents' fertility doctor, so it just sort of magically aligned that it would work out that way. And at 4 days old, my parents were able to take me home. But for that context, my dad was a Roman Catholic priest for over 20 years before leaving the priesthood to marry my mom. For even more context, my mom was a religious education teacher. She had a master's in religious education and was also an administrator at private Catholic schools for my entire upbringing. But that's not all. For even more additional context, my mom is one of 13 brothers and sisters, and more than half of them worked in the church in some regard. So all of this is to say, I was very much surrounded by religion when I grew up. With that said, my family, fortunately, was very liberal and very academic in their approach. So instead of taking a more literal translation of the Bible or some sort of fundamentalist approach, there was a lot of discussion around the historical critical context and meaning, symbolism, and allegory behind the different beliefs and the different texts that are associated with the Catholic religion. I was very lucky, and I have to admit how lucky I was to have parents who promoted an authentic expression of self as a reflection of our Creator. And while I am not a practicing Catholic anymore, I'm really grateful that my parents instilled those values in me, because what I took away from it was empathy, kindness, and just trying to understand where people are coming from. But even though I was lucky in having a really loving and accepting environment, I still wound up internalizing issues with self-worth, safety, and security. By the age of 6, I knew that I was different. I knew that I was gender nonconforming despite not having the language to express that, and I knew I liked boys. So during those particular years, they're really fundamental in establishing that sense of security in our human development. And I really liken this to the Four of Pentacles, which is interesting because it relates very much to my sun and my moon, but there were always issues with a lacking mentality or issues of security. I really felt like I needed to be perfect and feared really disappointing anyone because I really thought that I was disposable, especially as an adopted individual and as someone who felt very othered by society. I really honestly thought that my parents might send me back. To where, I have no idea, but I really feared that I would be abandoned or that I would be loved less if people found out who I was. And that is not an uncommon story. This wasn't a message I internalized because of something I was receiving at home, clearly, as I was sharing. It's something that I really understood as I was being integrated into society. I do think that things have gotten better, but I was a child of the 90s and a teenager in the 2000s. We didn't have amazing representation to show us the complexities of the human existence with gender identity or sexuality. For a gay man, for example, we sort of had an illusory binary. It was a very feminine, hypersexual, superficial, usually not super intelligent, feminine gay man, or a very masculine, traditionally attractive individual who people were surprised to find out were gay. And in that representation, the latter was deemed more acceptable and desirable, while the former, the more effeminate man, was generally the butt of the jokes. Even before I started growing out my claws and painting them, I definitely was not able to hide the fact that I was gay and gender nonconforming. People generally just assumed I was gay. It was painful, despite also sort of being a blessing, because the close people in my life remained close to me after I came out, per se, because they had already assumed that that might be the case. So I kind of lucked out there, but still I would be introduced as the gay friend. That part of my identity became almost the primary descriptor, and it felt really reductive, because despite any of my accomplishments or any of my other traits, that for some reason was pushed to the forefront when that wasn't necessarily on the top of anyone else's mind for any of their other friends. All of this is to explain my hesitancy with interacting with pride in a more out and proud way, per se, because I didn't want to necessarily give anyone any additional excuse to boil the complexities of my identity to this one specific uncontrollable trait. And again, I definitely think that things have improved. We did not have large segments of the population speaking out on our behalf when people were slewing out transphobic or homophobic remarks or comments. Now people who perpetuate that narrative are treated the way they should be, as ignorant, inhumane assholes. But still, gender and trans issues are our current battlefield. According to CNN, as of April 15th, which is the most recent stat I could find, 33 states have introduced more than 100 bills aimed to curb the rights of transgender individuals. So all of this leads me to why Pride is so important and a little bit about its history. So a little bit about the history of Pride. The precursors to Pride were the annual reminders of the 1960s, which were essentially picketing events that occurred each July 4th, and they served to publicly remind America that people in the LGBTQIA+ community did not benefit from the same civil rights protections. In November 1969, 𝗥𝗲 𝗹𝗏 𝗧𝗏𝗃, Linda Rhodes, and Fred Sargent proposed the first Pride March in New York City to help reach a greater number of people. June 28, 1970 was selected as the date of the first Pride March to honor the anniversary of the Stonewall riot. As a result of this, many Pride events are held during this month specifically. Another thing I want to mention is the definition of Pride, because some objectors will say, "What do you have to be proud of?" Which, that's a topic for a totally different Real Talk Tuesday, but pride isn't just the meaning of satisfaction from one's achievements. It's also defined as a consciousness of one's own dignity. And I think that that really encompasses the spirit and meaning of pride. It is an acknowledgement of our dignity and the fact that we are deserving of basic human respect. This leads me to why pride matters. There are a plethora of reasons why pride is so important. I am just going to focus on 3 major ones. First is that pride serves to remember and honor the people who came before us. Without the pioneers and allies of this movement, the people who put their very livelihoods on the line so that we could more freely and openly express ourselves, I don't think we would have seen the type of societal change in sentiment that we have over the course of the past 20 and 30 years. For example, I didn't know if I would live to see same-sex marriage be the law of the land, and it is really comforting to know that little queer kids growing up now don't have to grow up wondering if they're lucky enough to find someone to love them fully for who they are, if they'll be able to actually have that partnership and union recognized and protected legally. Still, as I said before, we definitely have a long way to go, which brings me to reason number 2. Pride is political. Our existence is a form of resistance. For us to show up in a society that seeks to pretend that we don't exist and eradicate us existing openly is political. Furthermore, we are politicized. People will often say, what you do in your personal life or in your private time is your business, but that simply is not true at all. Fair access to housing, the ability to marry, the ability to adopt, access to healthcare, access to community resources, all of these things are met with resistance from those very same people who tout that value of love the sinner, hate the sin, that kind of bullshit. And this isn't anything new. People in our community were tossed into concentration camps in the 30s and 40s. In the 80s, we died of AIDS while the government did nothing to intervene and didn't even acknowledge the fact that it was a problem. And then furthermore, we were ostracized and labeled as diseased. So when people say, what do you have to be proud of? Or why are you so political? Why do you have to shove it in our faces? The fact of the matter is, and I want anyone who believes that to listen to me very carefully, you, as a straight, heterosexual, cisgendered individual, have never had to overcome these kind of obstacles because of your sexuality, period. Straight people have never been rounded up and murdered because of their sexuality. It has not happened. So our existence is an act of survival. And on that note, sort of a sub-note of political, me just sitting here existing today is a testament to my personal ability to survive because of the messages that I received growing up, being told that it would be better if I never existed, that I would rot in hell, that my parents should be ashamed of me, that the world would be better off if I took matters into my own hands and ended my own life. The fact that people in my community stand up to that every single day and still exist proudly as who they are is an act of survival. And then finally, and incredibly importantly, pride gives us a sense of community. Some data for you. LGBTQ youth, for example, are 120% more likely to experience homelessness. Trans people are 4 times more likely to face violent crime. 1 in 3 trans individuals live in poverty and are disproportionately at risk of homelessness. And LGBTQIA+ youth are almost 5 times as likely to attempt suicide. So because of this and the stigmas that we face, Pride serves as a visual representation of belonging. It demonstrates that we aren't alone, and it provides us with a safe space to be able to experience joy and an ability to celebrate ourselves for this component of who we are. It also gives us safety in numbers, and it puts pressure on the structures which try to suppress our voices through these visible acts of protest. All of this is to say, pride matters. It is important. It serves a real purpose, and our work is not over. This also intersects with other human rights movements, and it's important to not forget that either. So I think this month that it's really important that we truly and deeply assess how our actions contribute to societal and structural change, because in the end, equality and equity can really only benefit us all. I really hope, and I can see this happening in our lifetime, that we reach a point where we're able to exist outside the confines of these illusory binaries and can just be. I don't have a super elegant way of ending this. This is just me, stream of consciousness, sort of sharing my thoughts. I have some bullet points in front of me, but that is essentially it for me today. I think in some future installments of Real Talk Tuesday, especially during this month, maybe I'll break down some of my counter arguments to some of the countercultural movement against us. But for today, as we enter this month of Pride, I hope that you are safe. I hope that you have a support system where you are able to openly and freely express yourself. And for those of you who are allies out there, thank you for helping us fight the good fight and being there for us. That alone is so important, because there are many of us out there who don't feel like we belong anywhere. And knowing that people are out there who care about us for who we authentically are and help us celebrate that is incredibly meaningful. So thank you if you are one of those wonderful allies. So that is it for me today. Thank you for joining me for my first ever edition of a Real Talk Tuesday, and happy Pride!